for those of you who have been bored, can't really say that word, can I? By the Philip Schofield conversation. We won't be doing that for at least half an hour, because Peter and I will not be talking about that, but we will be talking about great many other things, including what's been going on in Turkey, including the latest on the marijuana debate, and also education. But let's kick off with Whitsun. A happy Bank Holiday Monday to you.
Whit Week it used to be. So many whole towns used to shut down. It was a great English spring holiday, and that's what it was called.
Yes.
And people would get new clothes at Whitsun, all kinds of traditions attached to it.
Okay.
And then round about I suppose it must have been the late 60s, in another frenzy of innovation, the Wilson government decided to get rid of it and call it the late spring bank holiday, and so it just died out.
So, because the May Day bank holiday is still the May Day bank holiday.
Well, that's new. That was introduced by Michael Foot to try and make Britain more
workers of the world unite.
Exactly. It never really caught on. Usually, it almost invariably it meant very bad weather. There was it was guaranteed.
Right.
But then Whitsun.
But this is the third bank holiday Monday this month.
There seem to be a lot of them.
I mean,
but one of them was the coronation, which I suppose won't come.
I suppose we had to have that.
Not very quickly.
Right. But then we didn't have to have a bank holiday for coronation, did we?
We did.
Oh, come on. I mean, I'm sick of it by the Monday.
Yes, but it just...
I enjoyed Saturday and Sunday. In typical media, it's a 24-hour news cycle.
Not have a holiday for the coronation, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I suppose not. But yeah, because also when I lived in Scotland, and when I used to go to Scotland quite a lot with my parents, they had Glasgow Fair Week, which I think was similar to Whitsun, where they would basically, all the factories and the shipyards would close, and everyone would go down the coast to Rothesay and Bute.
Or Blackpool.
If they were the rich ones, though, because the poorer ones would go to Largs, and if they had enough money, they'd catch a ferry from Weems Bay over to Rothesay. And if they really could splash it out, they went to Blackpool.
Yeah, there were a lot of places where whole towns would shut in those days. But the Whit Weeks were a very big one, and it's interesting that it was a major both Christian and public.
I was going to say, was it religious, though?
Oh, very much. It is a major feast of the church. They call it Pentecost now.
Right.
But it's all about the coming of the Holy Ghost, which almost certainly, it like so many Christian festivals, it overlays an old pagan one. I think Beltane, I'm not sure.
Does that mean we can expect a lesson from the great Archbishop of Canterbury?
He's missed his chance.
Yes.
I'm not sure. He's come into the whole business so late, he may not even know.
I mean, the one thing about
Whitsun is himself, he'll know what Pentecost is.
The great thing is he spends so little time actually in a church. It's very rare to actually be given the Sermon on the Mount from him, isn't it?
I don't.
You're more likely to get in the House of Lords.
I mean, we only hear when we hear, don't we? And for all I know, he humbly preaches and does the offices at some tiny parish church week in, week out.
Unlikely.
We don't know about. Well, I don't want to preach. The one thing I will say about Justin Wells, on one occasion, when I got into a real tangle with him about a scandal in the church, which I won't bother you with, he actually eventually very graciously climbed down from a stupid position. I have to give him that.
Yes, okay, because you're big on that. If people actually are willing to
if he says I got this wrong, that is a major act of courage.
It does go a long way.
Yeah.
I hesitate to say this, but clearly Philip Schofield's not one of those people.
No, we're not. We've said this would be
we're not.
Schofield free zone. Let's talk
about the Christian teacher, because that was a big story last week.
Yeah.
Mr. Sutcliffe, I think his name was,
yes.
and Joshua Sutcliffe, was it? When the stories began in the Daily Telegraph, it looked as though he had been sort of wrongfully dismissed for being just awkward, for refusing to recognise somebody's pronouns, which a lot of people agreed with him on, and said, you're absolutely right, you shouldn't be forced to have to call somebody, because he actually said, I called the individual by their name because I thought that would work.
Yeah.
And he was then sort of summarily dismissed. But then it turned out that there were other things that he thought as well, which were perhaps not in keeping with his job.
I got the impression he was a bit of a pain.
A bit of a but I don't want to use the word sort of nutter, but he appeared on Piers Morgan's show and started talking about people who committed adultery should be stoned to death, along with anybody else who was a sinner.
You've got to admit,
and he kind of lost the room at that point.
Eccentric position. Even the Christian religion is softer than he is on that. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
Yeah,
but Yeah, I just feel that people should be pretty much allowed to think what they like, and to some extent say what they like.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that.
I had eccentric teachers. I had quite a lot of left-wing teachers in schools run by stern war veterans from the army with strongly conservative views, but they didn't mind.
I once was grabbed by an English teacher by the collar and sort of thrust up against the wall. This was in a Catholic grammar school, as you know, in West London. My parents were quite alarmed by it, but I just thought it was completely normal.
Well, this is we can't defend this kind of thing, but I'm sticking to thought and speech here. But I do think that there should be a variety of views accessible, because some of them are going to be inevitably, because teachers are sort of performers, aren't they?
But this is the great
they're going to be slightly different from others. You shouldn't. I was worried to discover, well, not to discover, but have to be reminded of the existence of this body, which can actually ban you from teaching.
I didn't know about it before.
And it's existed for some time, and it keeps changing its name. It used to be the General Teaching Council. I just don't think there should be a body that can ban people from teaching.
No.
I think there should always be somewhere people could fetch up where they can teach.
I mean, I could understand if they had a rule which said if you are convicted of a crime,
well, that's a different matter.
You can't be a teacher, fair enough. But the slippery slope I was talking about is that, we might both agree that some of his views were ridiculous. But even then, would you still say... Because where does the line then come? At what point did somebody else decide that your views are ridiculous and therefore you can't teach anyone?
Exactly, you can't do it, and you have to. The real question is he any good at teaching? And quite a lot of the best teachers there have ever been are deeply eccentric individuals with really weird opinions.
Yeah.
And so who cares?
Right.
If they teach children well and make their education memorable and effective, then I don't mind. And also, I think that if we could find out, we would discover that a large number of our schools are absolutely full of teachers with very, very strong left-wing views of the kind which I might find quite shocking.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they should be sacked for it at all, but I think that parents should know. I also think there shouldn't be a preponderance, as I think there is, of a certain view in schools.
No, my children have been told, both together and separately, by different people, that you shouldn't read the Daily Mail, right?
Yeah.
That you should not vote Tory, that you should not believe people who say there isn't a climate crisis. All of this goes on a regular basis in our secondary schools now.
I think, and in primary schools too. I shouldn't wonder either. No, I'm sure it does, and I think it should be. It shouldn't be. Schools shouldn't be an area of uncontested dogma.
Right.
There should be a teacher who is absolutely committed to the Greta Thunberg agenda, and there should be another teacher who says, well, actually, I'm not completely sure of the logic of this, or that this is the right reaction. Both of those should be represented, and that's how people learn. Actually, I am convinced in what is quite a long life that apart from times tables, which you have to learn, and
not anymore.
And French irregular, well, you have to if you're going to know them, and French irregular verbs, which you have to learn. Apart from those, the best form of education is debate between people with differing views. I don't think people are getting that in our schools. I think they're getting a strong beam of dogma, and I don't think it's very easy to find out what's going on, because schools are not public places. Especially, interestingly, since the academy system developed. I think they've become even less accountable than they were before. How do you actually find out if they don't want to tell you? If they think, here comes that climate change denier Hitchens, he wants to know what his children are being taught in school. Are they going to tell me?
No, they're not.
I don't think they are.
And it's no surprise, therefore, that those people graduate, go to further education, go to university, continue with that form of learning, which isn't learning at all, and then form themselves into, adults who work in senior positions in the civil service or whatever it is, and that's how we've got to where we are. See, quite clearly.
So, but it's the unanimity of it which gives me the creeps. And there has to be debate, there has to be disagreement, there has to be room for people to be at both ends of the spectrum, beyond the Overton window of sort of normal, boring, conventional wisdom. It's a fantastically good way of learning.
It is. And without wanting to go to the next debate about transgender issues either, they're having to pass a law to make teachers tell parents that their child might be issuing statements about wanting to be transgender or wanting to change their gender.
This is another thing that really shouldn't be. Schools should, because if schools are properly run, if they were doing what they were supposed to do, they shouldn't need all the regulation and inspection to which they're subjected, or laws to say they can and cannot do things. It's because they become they've become so politicised that this has happened.
Yes. Well, I know for a fact, because my children's primary school went this way. In order to get an Ofcom 1, which is the top of the league sort of for your school's conduct and its sort of, ability, there are many things that you can apply through. It's not necessarily based only on academic performance. It's based on inclusivity, and it's based on diversity, and it's based on all the things that you teach, which might be about different religions. It's nothing to do with how good the school is.
Yeah, and there are some schools, I mean, some Muslims, some Orthodox Jewish, and some Christian, which run into trouble with the authorities because what they teach runs counter to the dogma, and they get marked down for it.
Yeah.
I think that's just wrong.
It is.
If people, as far as I'm concerned, if people want an atheist school, let them have it. By all means, and don't bother them about it. And parents can, if that's what they want their children to experience, well then fine. But then the same should go for other religious positions as well. And you can't go around saying you can't teach that.
No, exactly right.
You can't teach provocation to violence. You can't teach active hatred, but you can teach a set of religious principles, it seems to me.
And you can teach tolerance as well, which is one of the things they definitely don't teach.
Goodness,
because there's no tolerance towards anyone who might have a view which would be considered unfashionable.
No.
I mean, that's just gone. We're going to talk about marijuana. There's a new report out, which Peter's tweeted, I've just retweeted. Marijuana use linked to depression, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia in young men, according to growing evidence. It's a story in NBC, which says there's a new study, new research involving millions of people worldwide over decades, so it's one that should be taken seriously. High-potency cannabis use could exacerbate the mental health crisis in the US. And I was just there, and I wasn't in a very urban environment. My daughter went into New York shortly after we'd been together, and she said, marijuana is everywhere. You can't walk down any street without smelling it. Yeah,
there's an interesting Douglas Murray piece a couple of days ago about I think it's governor of New York, who's simultaneously saying that that they should crack down on tobacco, but while letting weed shops flourish.
The governor of New York is particularly woke, I think, and I think she's also said that she wants to do away with all gas cookers, which has sent the restaurant industry into paroxysms, because they're like, well, that's what we've all used. So now she's watered it down to saying, well, if you've already got one, that's fine. You can't buy a new one.
There's masses of this stuff. There's almost a revolution going on in Germany, because they're all being told they have to have heat pumps. And they're saying, we can't have heat pumps, they don't work.
Yeah, right.
So support for the Greens is apparently collapsing in Germany.
It totally has. And they're building more nuclear now, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think they're actually reopening a couple of coal mines.
I don't think they'll build more nuclear. I think they're keeping a bit more of it open. But back to marijuana, if we may, because it's the key thing here. There's a fascinating quotation from a doctor in the story, if you call it up. He says, I don't think I've ever seen a person with mental problems who hasn't got marijuana in his or her record. Right. It remains correlation. And I have to repeat this mantra here. The big dope lobby will always say, well, correlation is not causation. The actual truth is correlation is not necessarily causation. It's also not necessarily not causation. And it was a very long time with tobacco and cigarettes and lung cancer when we only had correlation.
Yes.
And if we'd acted sooner on the basis of that correlation, an awful lot of people could have been saved from horrible deaths, but we didn't.
But we could have also said at that time, and the people did say it, that not everybody who smokes gets lung cancer, but most people who get lung cancer have probably smoked.
It's true, but the other thing was that at that stage, tobacco and cigarettes were legal and widely advertised, and so there was a limit to how much you could do anyway.
Yeah.
But in this case, marijuana is still technically illegal, and in almost every jurisdiction in the Western world now, there's a very strong campaign to make it legal. And I keep saying, you might at least, you people, you might pause in this campaign until you can be sure that this correlation isn't causation. Wouldn't it at least be sensible to wait and see?
Yes.
But this very large survey in Denmark, which it features very large numbers of people, and you get the answer again from the big dope lobby that people have the correlation is because people are mentally ill and they're, what do they call it, self-medicating.
Oh, so they're already mentally ill.
But I think that you can. This is an absurdity, because the huge explosion in marijuana use, and indeed the strength of marijuana in the Western world, preceded this growing realisation that there's more mental illness. You see this morning, the Metropolitan Police saying they really can't stand being stuck anymore with the
so
care.
they're just not going to do it.
But I don't think that there were anything like as many mental illness cases for the police to handle, nor if you visit prisons. You'll find the most tragic part of prisons is often the area where the mentally ill people are. They're there because there aren't any mental hospitals. Our society, since we closed mental hospitals, has precious little interest. No one has an interest in producing statistics saying there are lots and lots of mentally ill people, because no government wants to spend money on it.
No.
So you don't get those stats. But what you do
There's
get
no
is
votes in it.
there's no votes in it. There's no lobby. There's no lobby for. There ought to be, in my view, for reopening and re-establishing mental hospitals. It's very, very difficult when people are mentally ill to find places for them.
The big dope lobby, as you call it, is driven entirely by the amount of money involved, because there's an awful lot of money in it.
There is a lot of money.
I've actually got a friend who lives in California. He's an English guy, was in the film business, and now owns a marijuana farm, which is entirely legal to do in California.
It is,
and he told me something ludicrously mad, like, they put in, I think something like, they were all asked to put in $500,000 at the beginning of the venture, and after 6 months they'd made 20 million.
No,
20 million.
If you look up the donors to the big Proposition 64 campaign in California, which is one of the biggest of the, you'll find that an awful lot of them were billionaires, and you can't imagine that they don't see any advantage in it. And one of the things I keep saying about Proposition 64 that it contained was a demand that they should be free to advertise marijuana.
Yeah.
Now, imagine in this country you turning on your television and there being marijuana advertisements on billboards with marijuana adverts on, and imagine what that would do to the level of use of this drug if it happened. This is what the campaigners want, and it's a huge lobby. And I think they should, every time they step forward, they should be asked, there's so much of this evidence now pointing towards a serious mental illness thing. Shouldn't you at least wait and see?
Yes. Well, I think maybe the genie is too far out of the bottle for that, though, isn't it?
No, it isn't. Absolutely not. In this country, it's still illegal to possess marijuana, and
it's decriminalised, though. By and
yes,
large.
but that's de facto. The law has not been repealed. The government has never said this stuff is legal. It makes a huge impact if you actually legalise something. Once you legalise something, it's incredibly difficult.
I think the other thing that's changed massively the market in this country is that more and more, because you see court cases about this all the time, more and more people are now just growing it in this country, where it used to have to be imported in the same way that cocaine is.
It's our most succrowing agricultural.
It doesn't
sector.
now have to be done. And what I can tell you this, not because I'm an expert in marijuana, but my friend who's growing it, they've now in California worked out that it's a lot more dangerous to grow it in the open fields because people will basically steal it. So what they now have is these sort of hydroponic warehouses where they can grow 5 floors, 6 floors in a relatively safe and secure environment. They can lock the doors, and they just are making a mint.
It's one of the few growth industries in this country, not least because the people doing it have learned how to leach electricity for free off the.
Well, I think for those of them who are doing it legitimately, I don't think they have to even worry about that.
No, but
because this is industrial scale.
But that doesn't mean you can't stop it. I mean, I keep saying this, but in Japan and South Korea, they still use the law to prosecute possession and very effectively keep down use. And people say, well, Japan, they're also law-abiding. Actually, Japan brought in its tough drug laws because they had a very big amphetamine problem.
Yes.
And that they wanted to crack down on that, and those laws just happened also to affect
Paul
marijuana.
McCartney, didn't they? I mean, that's a long way back.
Paul McCartney discovered very, very sharply just how seriously they take it. But anybody who goes to either Japan or South Korea thinking it'll be like here, it gets a very big shock, and the society is different. And one of the things which differs when you do that is that still a considerable stigma against people who are caught using it, which I think would be a very good thing for young people who are under constant peer pressure from school at ages as low as 11 to take this drug. And again, the other thing coming out of the NBC report is what the doctor says, look, if you really must take it, then wait till you're 26, because when your brain's fully formed, because the dangers when it's not fully formed are huge. I believe they persist right the way through life, and I've had evidence to this effect communicated to me by people who've written to me. But nonetheless, it is true that if people are taking it in schools at the ages of 11, which they are, the danger to their long-term mental health, if this is a causal link, must be huge.
No question. I've got some breaking news for you on the Holly and Phil front, I'm afraid. It's a statement from Eamon Holmes. I have to read it out because it's quite
if you must.
Inflammatory.
Nation waits.
Schofield has just put out a delusional statement. Like Holly, he puts it on Insta stories, so if it goes wrong, there is no record after 24 hours. I'm reluctant to give the liar any more publicity, but believe me, Pip, if you're looking for a fight, you have picked on the wrong person. Wow.
Jimmy.
Goodness.
Who needs soap operas?
Goodness. I mean, really, you don't need to watch TV, just watch social media on TV. Let's talk about President Erdogan.
Yeah, let's talk about
and the Turks, because he's won himself another term.
Yeah, well, people go on a lot about democracy and what a great thing it is, and I have mixed feelings about democracy. I think that the most important thing in any society is freedom under the law, and so that you have to have two things: so the proper rule of law, which is genuinely impartial and is imposed on the powerful as well as on the weak. And you also have to have freedom of speech, thought and assembly. Yeah. Well, Erdogan undoubtedly has been a Democrat. He's come to power totally through democratic means. He's been elected and re-elected and
they've had a runoff
again, and now he's there pretty much for good, I think. And he has destroyed liberty in Turkey. The free press and free media in that country have been cut to ribbons, and the rule of law seems to me to have gone. You're not if he thinks you're an opponent of his, you either go into exile or you.
It's almost a military state.
Well, that it was before. The military, in fact, kept it sort of secular, because the other thing Erdogan is very, very militant Islamist. I remember for years The Economist magazine describing him as mildly Islamist, and I thought, you should, Coco. I mean, really.
Well, The Economist is now mildly Marxist.
Well, The Economist is
I know what's happened to The Economist.
Absurdly overrated publication that people should look at.
It's lurched massively left as well.
It always was, you know.
I suppose
it's just more obvious now. But the thing is, it's left in a weird way. So, for instance, it supported the Iraq War for left-wing liberal interventionist reasons, rather than because it was sort of warmongering. But they used to say mild, and I used to go to Turkey from time to time and report. And I said it's not mild at all. It's very militant. Yeah. And this is the guy who, for the first time since Ataturk created modern Turkey, turned Hagia Sophia, the Holy Wisdom, the wonderful cathedral in Constantinople, Istanbul, into a mosque, which Ataturk said it could be neither a mosque nor a church. He turned it into a museum. Right. But it's a very militant act to turn it into a...
And this is why so many people were very hesitant about this extension of the hand of the European Union from Angela Merkel, who at one point was more or less promising Turkey membership.
Yeah, I don't think the French would ever have borne it.
No.
I mean, it's complicated because so many German citizens are also Turkish, so you can see why a German leader might want to do that. But I think the French would always have. But it was a bit of a thing with the Brexit campaign. I think some people said that. I never thought that would happen. But don't forget, though, that Turkey is in NATO. Yeah. And the idea that NATO is composed solely of lovely democratic countries has never been entirely true. No. The Greek colonels, for instance, were in NATO, and Portugal was in NATO when it was a dictatorship. And now we have what appears to me to be something very closely approaching a despotism. People go on about Putin, rightly, because Putin's destroyed what was left of liberty in Russia after Yeltsin had trampled over most of it. But Erdogan is just as bad and doesn't, or hasn't until recently, got anything like such a severe press as he deserved.
I think it's probably because people don't understand what's going on there. But
well, there is that, but it's important because
it is.
It's really, really crucial country.
Yeah, it really is. But we'll talk more about Turkey, I'm sure. Peter, we've run out of time, though, unfortunately. Thank you very much indeed, as ever.